Good afternoon. This person comments and asks actually a lot of legitimate questions that I wanted to take some time to answer, and I don't have a clever song or fake lyrics to address all of them. One of his first comments is about how these vaccines, he calls them gene therapy, and that they've been untested. First of all, vaccines are not gene therapy. That's a very separate thing. You can't alter genes without DNA, and these mRNA vaccines don't contain any DNA within them, so there's no way they can actually change any of your genes. He acknowledges that point and then goes on to re-emphasize that they are new and untested, which really isn't the case either. We've studied mRNA vaccines for over 20 years. This is the first time they've been this widely distributed among a population as large as the world's, but going back, as I said, 20 years ago, we've made mRNA vaccines for things like influenza and MERS, but they never took off because of cost production issues or because the pandemics they were associated with died down, and so the money was no longer there because the need wasn't there as much. That said, we have still studied the safety and efficacy of mRNA vaccines for much longer than just this pandemic. He then goes on to ask about the safety data. Recently, a federal judge ruled that the FDA, not Pfizer, but the FDA, needed to release the safety data they reviewed about the creation of these mRNA vaccines. It's 300,000 some pages, and they were supposed to do it over 55 years, but they've shortened that timeline to, I think, 8 months. Now, I agree that this data should be public. But this is data about the creation of the vaccines and a lot of the precursors, not about the final product that we are putting in people's arms. Regarding the final product, we do have a lot of safety data. We've had over a year now of distribution and close safety monitoring. This is the most we've ever examined vaccines in the aftermath of distribution, probably in the history of medicine. We have so much safety data, and all of it overwhelmingly proves that the vaccines are safe and effective for the most part. Now with Omicron, that's starting to reduce a little bit. But with your third vaccine, that is actually still up there in terms of efficacy, and the safety profile is far outweighed by the risks of actually catching COVID-19. He talks about the worries about myocarditis and states that his father collapsed after his vaccine. And I am sorry to hear about that. I can't say what happened in that individual circumstance, but I've had patients that have come in with collapse and with myocarditis, and all of it has been temporary, much less so than would be from COVID-19 itself. I wanted to continue answering some of this person's questions. This one talks about how there's a lot of what seems like goalpost moving and statistic weirdness, and that's a legitimate concern. It isn't goalpost moving, but it seems like that sometimes. It's because as we keep learning about this virus and its effects on people and the efficacy of our vaccines and other therapies against it, we do have to adjust our recommendations and how we view it. We talked about in those comments about how science has to be questioned, and that's true. But it has to be questioned in a way that follows the evidence. And we have a lot of evidence regarding these mRNA vaccines and about coronavirus itself. But we're learning more each and every day. Not necessarily about the safety of the vaccines, because we've seen that overwhelmingly already, as I talked about in my previous video, but in how they are doing at preventing severe illness and hospitalization and death, which was their primary goal, and how COVID-19 is trying to outsmart them as it's supposed to do as a virus. I can't agree that this seems like fear-mongering, because it's reality. COVID-19 is scary, and Omicron especially has been moving so quickly through the population. I have multiple friends that have come down with it. My colleagues have been out of work because of it, and the myth of it being, quote, mild is false. A lot of that mild data comes from people who are actually already vaccinated and who've been taking steps to protect themselves. You are much more likely to have a serious infection with Omicron if you are not vaccinated. And more importantly, even if it's mild, that really just means that you're not requiring a ventilator or other intense therapy in the hospital. You can still be hospitalized, you can still have pretty severe illness, and you can still get PASC or long COVID. And that can lead to devastating consequences, much more long-term consequences than any vaccine will ever give you. And I can say that because that's how vaccines work. They don't stick around in your system long enough to actually cause any long-term damage. mRNA is such an unstable compound, that's why it has to be deep frozen, and that's why it doesn't stick around in your body longer than a couple of days. It makes the immune response and then it's gone. Now, the final point he makes is about hospitals not separating those that die from COVID and with COVID. That's just not true. If you have a death, then as you fill out the death certificate, you have to put the actual cause of death, and you can't just make something up. Those things get audited, they get reviewed. We can't fake COVID deaths. If anything, they're probably undercounted. This last sentence is very true. It's legitimate. People have been hurt by medications, and people have suffered effects of vaccines as well, and I will never not acknowledge that. But those side effects are so rare. Especially any major ones. People get reactogenic effects all the time, but the major side effects that you see are extremely rare. Blood clots from the J&J vaccine, I think it was 3 in every million doses. Myocarditis, 12 in every million doses. So that still overwhelmingly rules in favor of vaccines. Medications are different because you have to take those over a long period of time, and they can have more side effects that will last longer because they're designed to last in your system longer. But as far as vaccines go, yes, you should be concerned and you should talk to your doctor. But overwhelmingly, everything we know about COVID says you should get vaccinated.